Good morning. Earlier today, I made a breakfast soup, but it didn't turn out quite as I had hoped. It ended up being a bit too thin and lacked the depth of flavor I was aiming for. I think next time, I'll try to thicken it a bit more. At the same time, I'll need to be careful with the salt content since my doctor has advised me to watch my sodium intake. That said, I really do enjoy food with bold flavors. Speaking of flavor preferences, my mother-in-law, Brittany, is quite picky when it comes to her meals. She loves her food packed with seasoning, even though her health isn't in the best shape. She's a bit overweight and at risk of diabetes. Despite her doctor's warnings about her diet, she doesn't seem too worried and often adds extra seasoning to whatever I make. No matter how carefully I prepare meals with healthier spices, she always piles on more salt and pepper. It's concerning, and I'm really worried about what might happen if she continues to ignore her health. Dealing with Brittany can be tough. She's often critical and demanding. My name is Diana, and I'm 31 years old. In addition to working, I also manage our household. I've been married for 4 years, but we don't have children. Unfortunately, I'm unable to have children, and Brittany frequently reminds me of that. She's made it clear that in her view, my inability to conceive lowers my worth as a woman, and she often remarks that I should be grateful just to be living in their house. We've tried several times and undergone different treatments, but none of them have worked. The process has taken a huge toll on me physically and emotionally, so I've decided to stop pursuing further treatments. They're expensive, and the uncertainty of success makes it too difficult to continue. My husband even mentioned at one point that continuing fertility treatments seemed like a waste of money. This whole situation weighs heavily on me, especially when my husband sides with his mother and implies that not being able to have children makes me somehow incomplete. I've always wanted to have a child, but now I think it's time to accept the situation and try to find peace with it. Despite my husband pressuring me to conceive, the stress has been overwhelming. I couldn't force myself to get pregnant just to meet others' expectations, and after stopping the fertility treatments, I started to focus on finding happiness in my life with my husband. Still, Brittany clings to her hopes of becoming a grandmother. She constantly brings up the idea of us having a baby, and even goes so far as to buy diapers, waving them in front of me, saying, "Look, I bought these because you'll need them one day." One day, I responded sarcastically, "Aren't these too small for you, Brittany?" She replied excitedly, "These are for a baby, can't you tell?" I shot back, "Well, I wouldn't know, since I'm the broken woman who can't have kids." She got upset and stormed off to her room. Honestly, I was relieved she left, because I was exhausted from work and didn't have the energy to deal with her constant jabs. It seems she takes pleasure in making things difficult for me. We moved in with my in-laws after my father-in-law passed away about a year ago. It was a tough time for her, and that's when her doctor also warned her about her high risk of developing diabetes. We moved in to help her out, but despite her condition, she's generally okay as long as she takes her medications and follows a healthier diet. Unfortunately, she often skips her meds and indulges in whatever she likes, putting her health at risk. Frankly, I dread the idea of having to take care of her full-time. I'm still in my 20s, juggling a full-time job, and it's already overwhelming managing everything at home. The next day was my day off, and I spent most of it cleaning up around the house. Normally, my mother-in-law stays on the couch snacking, but unexpectedly, she got up and went into my room. I didn't really want her in there, but since I was busy, I didn't stop her when she said she had tidied it up. "Thanks," I said, though I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. "If you keep your room messy, you're going to attract bugs," she teased. I smiled slightly and replied, "I appreciate the help," though deep down, I was still suspicious of her real motives. It seemed like she took my thanks as genuine, but I couldn't help but think she was up to something. Later that evening, I decided to sleep in my husband's room. He had been out of town for a couple of days on business, and I knew he wouldn't mind. We usually sleep in separate rooms due to my unpredictable nursing schedule, which includes night shifts. Our relationship had grown a bit distant as well, but mostly, I didn't want to disturb his sleep with my odd hours. Once I saw that Brittany had retired to her room, I finally prepared to settle in for some much-needed rest. I quietly slipped into my husband's room, thinking, finally, some peace now that she's tucked away in her room. I ended up staying there for 3 nights, but my upbeat mood must have piqued my mother-in-law's curiosity. She started asking strange questions. "Are you sure you're not feeling anything odd?" she prodded one day. I avoided her eyes and replied, "What do you mean?" She let the topic drop, but I could tell she was thinking something over. Later that day, as she ate alone, I tried to relax before my night shift, but unwinding isn't easy with her around. She rarely helps with chores, preferring to tell me how things should be done, making it tough to ever truly relax. As she lounged on the couch, snacking and reading a manga clearly targeted at women, I couldn't help but wonder what her next move would be. The title of the comic, Epic Mother and Daughter-in-Law Swamp Battle, made me roll my eyes. When my husband finally got home from his business trip, it was late, around 9 p.m., and he looked utterly exhausted. "I'm going to take a bath," he said. "I'll heat it for you. Why don't you grab a beer while you wait?" I suggested, before remembering, actually, it's not great to drink before a bath. He sighed and settled for a non-alcoholic beer, accepting my advice. I thought it was obvious, mixing alcohol with hot water isn't safe. Even saunas post warnings about it, but apparently, some things just aren't common sense. After his bath, he started singing at the top of his lungs. Even though we live in a detached house, I was worried about the neighbors because it was so late. "Hey, you're being too loud," I called to him. "You're the one making a fuss," he retorted. I tried to quietly shush him, but then my mother-in-law intervened, stepping into the bathroom area. "What's the problem?" she snapped. "You don't know how to treat your husband, always nagging and complaining." "I'm not the one always complaining, Brittany," I shot back. "You're definitely not cute, and you're no beauty either," she sneered. I brushed it off, replying, "That's fine, somewhere else, I'm probably a knockout, no big deal." After that, my husband finished his bath and started drinking. It was already close to 9:40 p.m., and I needed to get ready for my shift at the hospital. The hospital was nearby, but there was still a lot to prepare for the long night ahead. As I grabbed my things, I casually mentioned to my husband, "I've been sleeping in your room, would you mind using mine tonight? It's a bit of a mess." "Sure, that's fine," he replied indifferently. "Okay, I'm off then, take care," I whispered, careful not to alert Brittany. Just as I was reaching for my bag, I heard my husband let out a loud groan. I turned around and saw him on the floor, clutching his leg in agony. His face was twisted with pain, and Brittany's expression turned pale with panic. "What's happening? Speak," she demanded, but he was too hurt to answer. My heart raced as I looked around. The floor was slick, unusually slippery. "What's going on here?" I exclaimed, looking between my husband and Brittany. "Brittany, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything, this isn't my fault," she shouted defensively. Realizing it wasn't the time for accusations, I immediately called for an ambulance. My husband was rushed to the hospital where I work, and suddenly, my night shift was the least of my concerns. At the hospital, he continued to moan in pain, clutching his leg. "It hurts so bad. Hold on, you're going to be okay," I urged, trying to comfort him. Thankfully, the doctor saw him quickly and eased some of our worries. His leg was broken, a fifth metatarsal fracture, exactly as we suspected after he slipped on the slick floor. His foot was swollen, a typical symptom of this kind of injury, usually caused by tripping or bearing too much weight on the foot. I couldn't help but remember my own experience with a similar injury. Years ago, I twisted my ankle falling down the stairs while lost in my music, and the loud snap followed by the sharp pain was unforgettable. I, too, once suffered a fifth metatarsal fracture, and though it's a bit of an embarrassing memory, it came rushing back as I watched my husband go through similar pain. To keep things simple, I told my friends a little white lie about his injury, as he didn't need to be hospitalized after the fracture was confirmed. He was able to come home the same day. I was supposed to work the night shift, but my supervisor urged me to take the night off, genuinely concerned about the situation, even though his injury wasn't life-threatening. While resting at home, my husband casually remarked, "I survived, but now I've got a fever." I replied, "Well, you did break your leg, so a fever's not shocking, but I still can't stop wondering why the floor was so slippery. We should ask Brittany about that." Feeling suspicious, I approached Brittany and asked, "What happened to the floor in that room?" Her response floored me. "Oh, the floor was slippery because I slipped. I could have hurt myself." My husband jumped into the conversation, and Brittany, to my shock, confessed, "Actually, I greased the floor to make my daughter-in-law slip. I didn't think you'd go in there instead." I was speechless. "Are you serious?" I exclaimed, realizing that she had intentionally set a trap for me. She had planned for me to fall and possibly suffer an injury. If I had entered that room, the outcome could have been far worse. I could have broken more than just a leg, hitting my head might have been fatal. Her actions were reckless and nearly criminal. You've crossed the line. You're not family to me anymore. I got seriously hurt because of you, and I'm going to the police, I declared firmly. Brittany, in an attempt to deflect blame, snapped, "Wait, it's not my fault. Your wife told you to use her room, so isn't this her doing?" "Enough," my husband yelled as he called the police. Brittany, in a panic, tried to grab the phone from him, but despite his injury, he held firm and reported the situation. I felt utterly trapped in this nightmare and wished I could be anywhere else, at work, at the hospital, anywhere but here. I realized the neighbors would soon hear about this, and it might even lead to criminal charges for Brittany. When I mentioned this to her, she screamed, "No, please don't call the cops." I fired back, "You knew what you were doing. Did you think you could just erase me from your life?" In a chilling admission, Brittany said, "Honestly, it would have been easier if you were just gone." "Wow, you're unbelievable. I hope they lock you away for a long time," I muttered. "That's it, we're getting a divorce," I declared. "What?" my husband stammered, shocked. "I'm done living like this. I don't feel safe anymore. You've crossed too many lines," I explained. "Wait, please don't end our marriage over this," he pleaded. "I don't need you, or this marriage," I replied coldly. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "But I need you. I even signed a contract for the Honda Century I wanted from Japan," he protested. "I couldn't care less," I said, gathering my things. I took off my wedding ring, left it on the table, and started searching through a stack of documents until I found the divorce papers we had drawn up years ago. "Remember these? You said if I didn't have a child in 3 years, we'd divorce. Well, guess what? I can't have children anymore," I added as I handed them over. With that, I left, carrying the papers, determined to move forward. "Let's get divorced," I said with finality. "What about my loan for the Century?" he asked. "Not my problem," I replied. I walked out and headed straight to the hospital. The head nurse didn't ask too many questions. She seemed to understand there were valid reasons for my sudden appearance. As a nurse, I knew I could rely on myself. I wondered why I had tolerated the abuse from my in-laws for so long. It felt ridiculous looking back, and I made up my mind to focus on my career and leave the past behind. The next morning, I filed for divorce. My now ex-husband was eventually ordered to pay compensation, and I couldn't help but think, serves him right. After the police became involved, the neighbors distanced themselves from Brittany, who was now viewed as a horrible mother. Eventually, my ex-husband seemed to cut ties with her as well. Without our financial support, Brittany struggled. Though there was a small survivor's benefit program, it wasn't much, and she found it hard to adjust to a more modest lifestyle. As for my ex-husband, I lost interest in what happened to him. He had mentioned the car loan for the Century, but I doubted he could afford it without my help. He had taken me for granted, expecting me to cover his expenses. Later, I started dating a doctor from the hospital. 3 years after that, we got married and were blessed with a child. After all the turmoil, it felt like a miracle. Now, I'm committed to cherishing this new chapter in my life and doing my best for my family. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video.